All right. Well, we will get started then. And I just want to start by welcoming everyone today to the Red Ant Forum, and a very special welcome to the United States Vice Presidential candidate for the Party of Socialism and Liberation, Karina Garcia. We are so excited to have you here, and it's a really great opportunity to meet with you today to speak directly about the campaign and the recent successes that you've had with the PSL in the United States. So my name is Maddie, for anyone that hasn't met me, although I think we've got a smaller group today, which is even better that we have the time to really be able to go through some questions that we all have for you. But we are meeting across different time zones. So we've got Karina and maybe some other comrades joining from the United States. I'm currently joining you all from Jakarta in Indonesia. We have some comrades from the Red Ant Collective that are on an exposure tour in the Philippines. I'm not sure if they'll be able to join us today, but hopefully can jump on. And of course, we've got Red Ant Collective members that are joining us from Australia. And for those members, I would like to acknowledge that they are meeting on stolen Aboriginal lands and that sovereignty in Australia has not been ceded, and that as members of the Red Ant Collective, we are committed to the struggle of First Nations people in Australia and of all oppressed people internationally in the fight against exploitation, colonisation, occupation and imperialism. As socialists, we believe these systems can be defeated when ordinary people like us take power into their own hands to build a better future. We also believe in supporting and defending socialist movements and revolutions when they take place internationally. The PSL exists to carry out this very struggle for socialism inside the US, or as I've heard Claudia and Karina often refer to, from within the belly of the beast, the very centre of world capitalism and imperialism. The lead up to the 2024 US elections have been pretty insane. I wasn't sure how to characterize it, but it's clear that the ruling class is in a crisis. There has been immense pressure building from students, from workers, and from everyday people in the US who are rising up against the Israeli invasion of Gaza and the unwavering support of the US war machine, both by the Democrats and the Republicans. There have been student encampments across major universities, with students demanding university administrations condemn the acts of genocide by the Israeli state and divest military and financial resources. This has also ignited a global movement of students, including on major campuses in Australia. In Indonesia, where I'm currently based at the moment, across the broad left, the US elections are probably the most widely watched outside of their own. And this is because the fallout of what happens in the US will be felt here. In our region, we are facing growing hostility towards China, signified through the US, UK, Australia nuclear submarine deal and the AUKUS military agreement. The PSL is growing, and it's strong in its conviction that the war drive has and will continue to be driven by capitalism. The development of monopoly capitalism in the US and across the imperialist bloc has led to a growing divide between oppressor and oppressed nations, which inevitably will lead to catastrophic crisis, militarism and war. The only way for us to abolish this and the horrors of capitalism that we see, the privatisation of our basic rights, the reversal of reproductive healthcare rights, the rise of racism and xenophobia, the targeting of minority groups, the campaign of fear and hate against refugees and immigrants, the drive for war and the complete destruction of our environment is through socialism. Karina Garcia is a Chicana organizer and popular educator who has been fighting for a better world since she was 17 years old as a high school student in California. From El Barrio in New York City to the border areas of Texas, she has helped build and lead campaigns against landlord abuses, wage theft and police brutality, as well as fight for reproductive justice, immigrants' rights and student financial aid reform. Karina believes above all in organising the power of the working class, organising with domestic workers and trafficking survivors in building their anti-wage theft and anti-trafficking campaigns, fighting alongside immigrant communities in New York City against ICE raids and Trump's vitriol, as well as representing her fellow educators in the United Federation of Teachers. Karina writes for Breaking the Chains magazine, a unique socialist and feminist magazine, and most recently she organised mobilisations against the Supreme Court decision that eviscerated abortion rights with the goal of rebuilding a working class movement. So on that, Karina, I would really love to hand over to you just to give us an update on what is happening in the United States. There has obviously been a lot of things that have happened over the last couple of months, and we'll leave at the end some time for discussion with Red Ant Collective members. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Maddie, and thank you to the Red Ant Collective for this wonderful invitation. It's so important for us to be in dialogue with you all, to be able to share what's going on, and to be able to find out about the struggles that you're involved in too. Obviously, we have the same enemy at the end of the day that is making all of our lives impossible. And the more and more that we're able to be around each other and to know each other, the stronger we'll be in all of the struggles that are to come. So thank you so much for having me and giving me this time to share a little bit about what's going on in the US, which I can't even imagine what it looks like from the outside world, as crazy as it is from the inside. So I'll start with the situation facing the working class. So inequality, it's been on the rise in this country for the last 50 years, but the cost of living crisis that we're going through right now is just overwhelming for millions of people. And of course, they never talk about that. You know, half the population at or near poverty. So many people who, it's one car accident, one medical bill away from being bankrupt, and of course, mountains of debt. The top 100 corporations, however, have been doing very well. Over the course of the pandemic, they, of course, took advantage of the pandemic, global health crisis, to price gouge the entire country, and really in every possible way. They jacked up the price of food, they jacked up the price of rent, housing, gas, health insurance, car insurance. It's incredible what they've done. But of course, they use, their same instruments, the media, to be able to justify this. And they use the excuse forever of supply chain problems to justify what they were doing. And when they got tired of using that, then it was inflation. And reality, they just jacked up the prices. And it's just been pure price gouging, plain and simple. And, they do as much, they brag about it even in their earnings calls. Because that's how arrogant they are in terms of their own power. So on top of all of this, the elimination of all of the COVID era protections, which for most other countries would be just the basic minimum, but our ruling class is particularly vile in terms of any social programs in this country. So the Democrats were responsible for getting rid of those protections. They passed a child tax credit. They did a stimulus. They did things that they always said were impossible to do, could never happen, but they ended up doing it themselves when they felt that things could actually get worse for them. So even without a lot of organization and a lot of sort of movement at the time, they went ahead and sort of anticipated the economic crisis that could happen. And so they did they passed a moratorium on evictions and foreclosure for a period. Something that, like I said, in 2008, when there was a huge economic crisis and millions of people lost their homes, they said that could never happen. How could it happen? But in 2020, when they were worried that things could really get outside of their hold, then they went ahead and did it themselves. And then after spending, all the news cycles justifying inflation and all the attacks on working class people, they sort of let that go. And of course, the Democrats blame the Republicans. There's also, on top of that, this huge boom in artificial intelligence and the monopolization that has led to significant stock boom at the same time that there's so much inequality for working class people. They keep telling us over and over again that the economy is looking up, everything is good, and Bidenomics. And in reality, less than 1% of people actually have any stocks. So, the economy for most of us is still as bad. It's worse than it has been in the last 50 years, but they continue to tell the lie that things are looking up. Because for them, they are. Maddie mentioned the attack on social civil rights, abortion rights, where half the population is living in states where they've essentially eliminated access to abortion. Of course, it hasn't eliminated the need or abortions because people always find a way. But it has led to, a lot of travel. It's made it very difficult, very expensive. And the question about uh, the type of abortion pills that they could get to be able to carry out an abortion on their own is still another thing that's sort of under attack. So even though this is something that the Democratic Party champions itself as the protectors of abortion rights, over the last 4 years, they've done nothing to actually protect abortion rights, not even to assist people who are in states where abortion is essentially banned. They use it as a way to get votes, they use it as a way to fundraise, but they've never codified it into law. And they haven't even used the most basic powers that they have to create any more services for people, to use federal lands, to use military clinics, to help people in any kind of way. They just hold it as something that the big bad Republicans did, and if you don't vote for me, well then abortion's gonna be banned everywhere. So this is the way that they're dealing with this, of course, but this is the battle that we're having, in not allowing them to continue to pass the buck. In previous times, buying a home was the way into the middle class for working class people. Now it's basically impossible. Throughout the pandemic, big investment firms bought up all of the single family homes all around the country, big Wall Street firms, and turned them into Airbnbs. And so people cannot compete with that. And so buying a home is very, very, very difficult at this time in this country. Of course, all of this continues to lead to the disenchantment, some demoralization, and also radicalization. Just generally reflecting distrust in all of the existing institutions of capitalist government, from the Supreme Court to the Congress, the big banks, of course, the White House. There was actually a recent poll in the New York Times where 69% of Americans believe that the political and economic system in the United States needs to either be torn down entirely or undergo major changes. 69%. And this is the New York Times. So it's like a strong majority of US voters who are dissatisfied with the state of the political and economic system in this country. So that is a big difference that we're seeing. And that's the way that it's translating into this campaign and into the growth of the party. It really can't be understated. We're using the campaign, of course, to talk about our own program. Our program speaks to these issues directly. One of the slogans that we have been popularizing is to seize the top 100 corporations, and in our different speaking tours, talking about what that is. To abolish these ruling class institutions, to build a new democratic system. And it's a very radical program by US standards, but it's actually capturing people's attention because it finally speaks to the depths of the crisis that people are facing. And the fact that 69% of the country is saying, is willing to say that the whole system needs to be overhauled, that tells you that we can be very clear about our slogans and not hide anything, really. So now I want to talk a little bit about the political crisis in the ruling class, which Maddie alluded to too. So and I know you all have experience, it's the same thing. This empire can't accept the rise of China, and they can't accept a multipolar world. On this issue, all sides of the ruling class are united. They have so much unity when it comes to funding forever war in Ukraine, in terms of the encirclement of China, the attempt to strangle it and de-link from it economically. They've all united behind Israel and its genocide. But no matter what they do, with their arrogance, all they can do is perpetuate conflict. But they can't actually shape the world the way that they want to. So it keeps backfiring, and it leads them to the same problems that they're trying to stop. And then they blame each other. So the Republican Party, in the Republican Party, there's been a total takeover of Trump, who is, of course, a complete demagogue, who does care only for himself. He doesn't really think about the long-term interests of his class, but it seems that he hopes that he can sort of buy them off by slashing taxes and regulation. Amazingly, he attempted to steal the election, was impeached twice, and they didn't want to move against him. So ultimately, he did regroup and regain control, and now no one in the party dares to criticize him. He's actually stronger than ever in the party. There's a faction of the party that's pushing a hard right agenda to basically go back to the form of government before the New Deal. This is known as Project 2025. It's something that the Democratic Party is using a lot to try to fearmonger people back into their camp. But Trump is distancing himself from it because it seems he understands that the working class has not actually moved to the right on all of these issues. Abortion rights, in particular, is something that is extremely popular in this country. And so he's sort of trying to hedge in that question. He did get a boost from the assassination attempt, especially among tech billionaires like Elon Musk and some who have lost all hope in the Democratic Party. But it's not like the working class has forgotten his first terms. But he is a sign of this decaying system, which brings me to the Democratic Party, Joe Biden. So Joe Biden, of course, failed on all of his promises for new social programs. Here in the United States, he called it Build Back Better. It was supposed to be the basics, community college, some family leave, some benefits for the working class. None of it ended up passing. And the genocide in particular has cost him dearly. So he pretty much didn't do anything since 2020, except say a lot of pro-police stuff, fan the flames of war. There was an infrastructure bill that did very little. Ultimately, though, he wasn't overthrown by the left of the Democratic Party. He was overthrown by a sector of the establishment. The establishment basically wanted to put a new face on the establishment, and they saw a unique opportunity to do this after his disastrous debate after the primaries. So there would be no Democratic progressive challenger. It didn't allow that. Kamala Harris has some real momentum now, in large part because she's just not Joe Biden. But it's short-lived in that she also represents all of the same policies. So that's sort of a little bit about the political situation, the political crisis of the ruling class. In terms of the challenges of the left, I wanted to share a little bit about what the campaign's been like, how we're using it, what we're thinking about it. So we are on the ballot in 22 states, and that's more than we've ever had before. There's no federal election standard or a way to be on in all of the ballots. You have to kind of go state by state. That's what makes it so difficult for third parties to actually have a chance in these elections. But the party has doubled in size since 2020. So this is a lot of young people's first campaign. And we've had a lot of growth, especially on TikTok and Instagram. The ruling class doesn't allow, the Democrats and the Republicans don't allow third parties to be in the debates. So really, all of the coverage or reach of the campaign is purely based on social media and based on our presence on the ground and our comrades in the different parts of the country who are involved in different struggles. But for the first time, TikTok has been a serious game changer for the party in terms of being able to reach a lot of young people. And in fact, we're meeting people every event that we go to who are just coming from TikTok. And it's really incredible. You can't tell at this point based on the views from the TikTok videos, which I think is so interesting. In the beginning, we kind of got a little bit of virality, but now the views are very low. And yet people are still coming from the events. And one of the things that they're saying is that their friends are sharing videos, not from even directly from our campaign sometimes, but other people talking about the campaign. So there's like a whole different world of it's like sort of social media influence that I don't think we'll ever really be able to kind of count, just because it's not in your views or whatever. Like it's just kind of translating when we have people on the ground and they can come to events. So that's been something very different from previous campaigns. Our party also played a leading role in the massive, constant mobilizations for Palestine, and that's really distinguished our campaign. That it's not something that we're trying to just give illusions about the system, but that it's actually a campaign that's in the streets week after week that's trying to build a movement. And that's anti-imperialist, something that, of course, neither party can do. So that's also been one of the sort of factors in the success of the campaign. I've also been campaigning at the border a lot recently. So I can speak a little bit about the immigration situation and how much it's obviously very serious. There's a lot of demagogy and scapegoating from both parties, but it is something that people are concerned about, but it's also not something that's impossible to talk about. When we say like the vast majority of the migrants who are coming from Cuba, Venezuela, and the sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela, like that would be, just that in and of itself, sort of demystifying the role that the United States plays in the rest of the world. That's something that's not that unknown. It's not very unknown for Latino communities for sure, but it's something that's growing more and more, especially with young people, as they've seen the role that the United States has played in Palestine. They've learned about what's going on in the Congo, Sudan. They're learning about, in Venezuela, of course, the media is very, very, very skewed here. But still, there is a significant new anti-imperialist movement that's been taking hold that is drawing the connections between the US policies abroad, how they affect us here, and that just in general is diminishing the credibility of the United States as any type of moral authority when it comes to global politics. So it's sort of easy for us in some ways to distinguish ourselves politically from both parties, since both parties scapegoat immigrants and basically are moving further and further to the right? Like people have been calling Biden the new Trump. And Kamala is the same thing. That said, there are real fears in the immigrant community with the scapegoating and with the talk of mass deportations. And there's also a history that we're sharing and that we're sort of bringing back to people about what it is that actually puts the far right back on in its place. And it's always been the movement. It's always been the mass movement. And so what we're seeing right now with Kamala, it's like deja vu, honestly. When I joined the party in 2006, and in 2008, Obama was elected. 2006 was the mass movement for immigrant rights. This is when undocumented immigrants came out, huge numbers. They had the biggest demonstrations in U.S. history. At a time when everybody said they were too afraid and too, living in the shadows, too afraid to protest. And yet they had the biggest demonstrations in U.S. history all over the country, extended for months. Of course, that energy was co-opted by the Democratic Party, who told them today we march, tomorrow we vote kind of thing. And then Obama was able to swoop in using that same energy. And his campaign slogan was "Si se puede," yes, we can, which was infamously, immigrant rights, workers' rights slogan. And then, of course, in 2009, 2010, Obama said "no se puede," So that's sort of like a bringing back that memory of the betrayal, the constant betrayal of the Democratic Party to actually pass any meaningful immigration reform. That's something that we've been hitting on a lot in this last stretch of the campaign. Well, last for me because I'm 8 months pregnant, but not for the whole campaign. That's something that we've been hitting at a lot to sort of push back against this really like absence of memory cheerleading that's happening for Kamala Harris right now, of course, by the corporate media. But reminding people about the last 30 years of broken promises, about the scapegoating of immigrants, and then reminding them of what is the way that the immigrant communities were able to get anything in this country. And the only, wasn't even like full legalization, but the only reform that passed during this whole period from 2006 to now for immigrant rights was DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which basically just gave them work papers. The only reason that young people were even able to get that is because undocumented youth targeted the offices of the Democratic Party. That's the only reason. They did sit-ins, they did demonstrations, they did protests, but they stopped just targeting the Republicans. They started targeting the Democrats and saying, put your money where your mouth is. And that's the only way they got even that little breadcrumb of reform. So that's kind of our task now, is to revive that memory, remind people of what actually makes a difference. And even when Trump was elected in 2016 that first time, immediately he came in strong with the Muslim ban, and immediately thousands of people around the country stormed airports and had huge demonstrations, and he had to pull back from that. So that's the only real response to the rise in the far right, is for the people to be in motion. And the Democrats do a good job of sort of pulling that back and using the people as their backdrop, but this sort of reminding people of this history, of this betrayal, and pushing forward for our need to build a movement that's independent of them, that has our own demands. That's been something that has been both energizing and I think that distinguishes our campaign from a lot of the others, basically. So our assessment is that the left is at a crucial inflection point right now. There's not a lack of struggle or movements here, but really the infrastructure of left organization and ideology was broken after the fall of the Soviet Union, really even before that. And one reason the left has struggled to become visible, ideological, political force with a unique voice is that for too long, it's lined up behind the Democratic Party every 2 years. So people actually associate the left with Democrats, even though it's a right-wing party. That's kind of where we are. The threat of Trump, of course, is real, but honestly, the threat of a war with China or mass deportations or extreme inequality, genocide, all of that exists with both parties. And that's another part of our message that we've been sharing, and that also is true. It rings true to people, So we have to be ready to fight on day one of the next administration, regardless of who it is. And the way that we can signal that we're strong and that we're ready to fight is by having a historic Vote Socialist campaign, in addition to participating in all the struggles that we dedicate our lives to on a daily basis.